Hello everyone, welcome to .NET channel. Today let's understand how could we authenticate an Azure SQL with Azure App Service using managed identity. In this video, we will try to understand what is a managed identity and when you can use managed identities, and also we'll create a basic ASP.NET app and SQL database, and we will try to deploy this to App Service and Azure SQL. And instead of using any other authentication mode like SQL, we will use managed identity to connect between the app service and the Azure SQL. And I will try to show the demo on Azure. Before you start it, you should have Azure Studio IDE, Azure account, development knowledge of ASP.NET, SQL and C Sharp, and basic knowledge of Azure is good enough. Let's understand what is managed identity. Managed identity provides an identity for Azure resources to connect between Azure resources, which are Microsoft AD protected resources such as Azure App Service, Azure Storage, Azure Key Vault, and it doesn't require any developer to manage any credentials for the resources. Automatically managed identity, it creates and rotates the secrets, and also it gives a lot of security, and developer doesn't need to handle secrets in the code like we used to do create like service principal, right, where you have to create the service accounts, create them, manage them, rotate them, right? All those things you know to do with managed entities. There are two types of managed entities. One is system assigned, the second one is user assigned. System assigned is very tightly coupled with one single Azure resource, whereas user assigned identities you can create multiple, and one Azure resource can have many assigned identities. In this video, I will cover the system assigned identity to connect between Azure SQL and Azure App Service. And when to use managed identity as a developer on any Azure resource which supports Azure AD, you can use managed entities. If you take an use case, right, as a developer, I want to build something. Let's say I want to build an Azure function that connects to Azure storage, so you can go and use managed entity, so you don't need to manage any credentials in this case. So you can take any left side scenario as a source and right side as a target. If this supports Azure AD authentication, you can use managed identities. So let's get into the demo. What we will do is we will have an Azure App Service, Azure SQL. To connect between these two things, we will use managed entities. Let's get into the demo. In my previous video, I already talked about how to deploy an app service to Azure SQL. It is a very step by step process. You can go and find out. I will provide the link in the description. Yeah, which is this one. So you can go and I'll give the link in the description. Now let's connect to the Azure portal. I already created an Azure App Service and also Azure SQL, and I deployed the app. And if you go to my app, so this is the app I created. And if you go to the resource group, so if you see here, it has just now I created a DNM web app SQL with managed identity, and also I created a SQL database and a SQL server. I tried to use a free version of Azure App Service, and I have used a basic version of SQL. So let's go to the SQL. Let's go to the query editor. Let's connect as my Entra account. If you go and see the table, which already contains the data, let's run this so you can see certifications. For this, I have used the code. So this link also I will provide if you go to repositories. So this is the app which I created already. And if you go to the SQL script, this is the script I ran to the Azure SQL. Now let's go back. Let's duplicate this. Let's go to the home. Let's go to the web app. Now if you browse the web app, you can see the certifications which are connected into my Azure SQL. And if I go and just let's go and remove these. Let's add one. So you can, if you go and see the previously it was not there. Now if you run it, so it is getting updated, which means that this app service using this Azure SQL. And if you go to my web app, and if you go to the environment variables and connection strings, and if you look at the value, so I'm using a connection string. It is connecting to learn database for this particular SQL server. And if you see here, I have used a SQL authentication, DNM SQL server. I have a password as well. So I use SQL authentication and I'm able to connect. Now what we will do is we will remove this connection. So let me go here. Let's delete this connection. Let's apply and confirm. Now my web app doesn't have any SQL connection. Let's go and refresh this. Okay, it says it's not able to connect to our database. Now let's try to use managed entity to connect between Azure App Service and Azure SQL. So now let's go to the app service. So to enable managed identity, go to the identity column. You have system assigned and user assigned. User assigned is something where you can go and create your own identities. But let me go and just enable system identities. Let's click on save. Now it says this particular app will be registered as enter ID. And basically what it does, it goes and creates an application in Azure AD. So let's create this. So now once it is enabled, what you can do is you can go to the role assignments. Now for this particular application, now I'm trying to give access to our application, our Azure database. So let's do an role assignment. Select SQL. I will select the demo. I will select the role as I'll give a contributor access. Let's save this. So now if you look at here, our application with the system identity, it has got access to the SQL server as a contributor. Now what we have to do is basically for this particular account, now we have to give permissions on our database. We can do manually, but I have a particular script which runs and does everything for you. So let me open the PowerShell. So let me take a notepad. So once you create this managed entity, once you give access, just go and run this particular command. What it does is basically it goes and creates a SQL connection with the system identity to this database of this server. And in the background, it does everything for you. Basically it goes and give all required permissions to the database for this particular identity. So let me just check. So it's a SQL. The resource group is correct. Let me just take my app service name. So let me take the name as this. It's a connection, resource group name, target, the server, the learn database. Okay, everything is good. So now let's go here and let's run this. So now if you look at here, it's trying to do all the required permission process in the background. Basically what it does in the background is it goes and creates these kind of permissions. This particular user is your managed entity, and it goes and try to give the required permissions on the database. So it says was not found. Okay, let's go and check the app service. Let's go to environment variables. So it's not created. So let's check this. It says under resource group was not found. So let's go and check our. So I have given the SQL Server name as wrong. Instead of SQL Server, I have gave as the web app. That was the issue. Now it is. If you look at here, what it does is it is going and connecting to the database. For this particular database, it is running a query, creating this managed entity as an external provider, and also it has given required permissions. So once it does, actually it goes and creates a app setting over here. So let's wait for the completion. Yeah, now the settings is done. Let's go and refresh here the app setting. Okay, now it's created a connection string. What we will do is let's take this value. Let's take this value. We will go and create our own connection string. So our key name is, if you go to the web app, if you go to the app settings, our key name is string. So let's do that. Let's give the value. If you look at the value, it is connected to our SQL, but if you look at here, it doesn't have any SQL authentication. Instead of that, it says authentication as Active Directory managed identity. Now I will select SQL Azure. Let's apply this. Let's go to the app setting. Okay, let's save this. Confirm. Now if you can go and remove this particular connection which is not required, let's apply. Let's confirm. Now let's refresh our app. Now, if you look at here, now it is connecting to our Azure SQL via managed entity. I can go here. I can create any kind of test Azure certification. Let's put a date. Let's create this. So now, if you go to the Azure database, if you go to the database and let's connect query editor, let's connect to this. If you now write select star from dbview certificate. Now, if you run the query, you can see newly created certification which we created just now. Now, with this, we are done with the demo. We have created a web app. We have created a SQL server. Initially, we connected with SQL authentication. Then we removed the SQL authentication and enabled managed identity in the identity column. Then we have given required permissions in the assignments to the database. Then we run the PowerShell script to do all the background work. Now with this, right, we are able to run the web application with the SQL server connected with managed entities. Let's go back to the PPT. Now let's look at some of the limitations of managed identity. With system managed identities, you have to tie up with Azure resources. Anytime if you delete a resource, the identity will be deleted. If it is user assigned, these are flexible, but you have to manage yourself creating managed entities. There is an overhead which you have to do it, but yeah, these are the ones you can. If you want to use one user entity for multiple, you can use this option, and it is tied up with Azure AD. Any Azure resource which is mapped to Azure AD only can be used. And if you are looking for a multi-cloud kind of an option, managed entity, you cannot implement it. With this, we are done with the demo. Do subscribe to our channel, give a like button, share with your friends to reach this video to more people. Click on the bell icon